Yahweh Signal. You all here? Welcome. Nyangwe Signal. It means hello in Seneca. You're in Seneca territory traditionally right now, where the three rivers meet. And I wanted to introduce you in the language of the place and ask that in the future you recognize the local nations. There's over 500 nations in what we call today the United States of America, what I call Turtle Island. And I am Shinnecock from Long Island, New York. And in our language, I'd also like to welcome you, which I would like to say Hakame. So Nyangwe Ho and Hakame. I'm thankful you are all well, and welcome to the Art of Otherness. The Art of Otherness is at first an acknowledgement that there is, in fact, an other as it relates to art, a multitude of understandings of material engagement from perspectives that are not as fluidly activated in the field as they should be or should have been. Who gets to tell our stories? Do you ever think about that? Who gets to tell our stories? A Muslim woman living in post-9/11 world, a transgender person addressing discriminatory laws against gay, bisexual, transgender, genderqueer, and intersex people. A Caddo sculpting a demand to be heard as an artist. A woman, a Native American. The inequalities, the prejudices, the fears, the art, the otherness. Who gets to tell our stories? So my name is Courtney Leonard, and I'd like to welcome you all here and thank you for your time, and Nsika, thank you for your time and this opportunity, and introduce you to one of the fascinating human beings that I've had the pleasure of meeting just recently, although we've worked together for months, Raven Halfmoon. Raven Halfmoon attended the University of Arkansas for her undergraduate years. She earned a BA in ceramics and painting, as well as a BA in cultural anthropology. Raven finished a residency at the Red Lodge Clay Center and recently moved to Texas to start her own studio. Everyone, please help me in welcoming our first panelist, Raven Halfmoon.
Hello, I am Raven Halfmoon, and I am an artist and also a member of the Caddo Nation, which is a tribal sovereign government located in Oklahoma. Okay, so I'm originally from Oklahoma, which is home to 37 federally recognized tribes. I grew up learning a lot about my tribal history, as well as American Indian history from my family. My family is well connected in the Native American community, and I was always encouraged to make art and feel a connection to that. So on the top photo here is where my tribe is located in Binger, Oklahoma, which is western Oklahoma. And the bottom photo shows women dancing the turkey dance, which happens before sunset, and it's on our traditional dance ground, and they are also wearing traditional regalia. So my family has a lot to do with why I create. My dad works for the chief of the Cherokee Nation in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, and my mom is the museum director and American Indian liaison at the Oklahoma State History Museum. So it was during my undergrad at the University of Arkansas that I started to become super interested in identity and my heritage, but I wanted to express that through art. I began taking anthropology courses, which helped shape my work into what it is. My tribe is originally from the Arkansas area, so I was studying my ancestors' pottery and history, and which in turn started to inform my artwork. My ancestors made this pot right here on the right, and this was before European contact. So everything I was looking at our archaeological survey was prehistoric. And compared to that, this is a bottle I made during my undergrad on the left, which is an interpretation of the ancient Caddo vessel I was looking at. So the black color and sometimes dark chocolate bottle form and engraved decorations and curvilinear lines distinctively denote Caddoan vessels. So I wanted to try my hand at creating some. However, I discovered that as much as I appreciated appreciated studying ancient pottery and the iconography on the work, as well as the craft of making the piece, I wanted to take my work in a more modern direction. So at this point, I was using my anthropology research to inform the artwork and physically manifest intricate concepts of identity. I started looking at monumental artworks throughout history, such as the Olmec in Mexico and the Easter Island heads. I was intrigued with what these artworks meant and how they were created. I started looking at monumental heads. And so, for example, on the left here, I have a Caddoan effigy vessel that I'm reinterpreting in a way that's important to me and my work and my message. So this research has led me to what my work is today. My art is me continuously trying to understand my place within my world, within my tribe, within society, and within the fine art world. I'm trying to keep my culture alive by continuing to make, and it is one way that I represent my heritage and generation. Caddo, which means Miss Caddo, was made in conjunction for Indigenous Peoples Day, which is the same day as Columbus Day. My people have been working with clay for thousands and thousands of years, and clay is an ancient material that was important for caddos in their everyday life. Clay was also used for sacred objects such as rituals and ceremonial purposes. It's important for me to emphasize that caddos are still relevant and continuing to build traditions and create with clay today. So over the past year, Over the past year, I've been focused on producing a body of work that reflects how I feel as a woman and an American Indian living in today's world. With these pieces, the themes I want to explore are who I am as an individual and who Native people are in a modern society. I'm exploring the ancient legacy of my heritage, but at the same time trying to acknowledge this modern day and age. My work is all the things I've learned about being Caddo from my family, from my education, from my experiences, and I have taken all that knowledge and have combined it into my work, and this is how I've stamped my art. So we wear dashados when we dance, which is a ribbon that hangs down from our heads in the back, and it has circular mirrors on it, and that's what the back of this piece is referencing. So the policies of the new current administration have reversed progress on a number of issues, and this made me realize how important telling our histories and sharing our stories is to the world. So pictured here is the Standing Rock image that was fighting against the Dakota Access Pipeline. So I want to change the way history is taught and not forget our nation's brutal past. We need to have new voices going into the future. So with the election of a new president, climate change, and social oppression, it is more important than ever before to have a unique voice, express it, and strive to make that heard. I understand how important it is for me to share my unique perspective with the world and with others who have no understanding of Native history or have encountered American Indians. So some basic problems we are continuing to deal with is this Native American stereotype. I feel in our society, being Native American, people look at us as a mascot or a cartoon character. These are images and stereotypes we see over and over again. It's the media stereotype of the Indian. It's what our youth sees as American Indian. It's looked at as a dying breed of people who exist only in natural history museums. These logos minimize who Native people are today. And it just goes to show that people don't believe we still exist when we have logos like this in our media. So it is a constant battle fighting cultural appropriation, Halloween costumes, the festival scene. We hear an exude of excuses all the time. I'm honoring you, it's just art or fashion. Or I've also gotten, it's not even that big of a deal. To start off, with this specific regalia, the headdress, it's usually only worn by a specific political or spiritual leader, and then within that, it's only worn by men, and even within that, it's only worn by Plains tribes Indians, which is a small number compared to the thousands that are in America. So these sacred articles are not iconic items. They have religious significance, and it's even more hurtful for natives because the abuse and the discrimination that took place on this land that we currently live on. It's not cool to take a piece of our culture and wear it to a social occasion, and it's not a fashion accessory. I feel there's a lack of awareness with our history and cultural significance with regalia, and it's creating pan-Indianism, which puts Indians all into one category, for which I'm Indian, but I'm also Caddo, and we have our specific histories and traditions very different from any other tribes in America. So because of this stereotyping, there's this notion of what real Indian looks like. We're full blood and live on reservations and speak our native languages. We live in teepees and practice religious ceremonies. We have dark skin and long hair. And I mean, this list just goes on. And we're made to feel guilty for not fitting that stereotype. But we don't all look that way. However, we are all connected to the heritage and to our tribe. So the removal from our ancestral homelands to make way for westward expansion was tragic for our people, as well as boarding schools that dismantled religions, education, families, communities in an effort to reform their identities into a more European American. Because of this tragedy, many American Indians hid their identity for years to come for fear of racism or their children being taken away. Can you imagine trying to hide your identity and your heritage in the land where your people came from? This notion of kill the Indian but save the man was seen that our culture was so barbaric that we had to be destroyed for the superior European culture. But then, after all this, people are confused when we don't know our languages or religious practices or traditional ceremonies. But despite all this, Native people are still learning their languages and still learning their culture. Our people and our spirit will not be destroyed. At the best efforts of Anglo-Americans to destroy us, we have the will to survive, and within us, we are a thriving people. So people are always judging me and my authenticity of being Native, whether that's through my appearance, knowledge of my tribe, or even my extracurricular activities. It's always this feeling of not feeling worthy enough, and it's exhausting. It's self-consciously fighting this voice of doubt and doing the research to find out about my heritage and culture. It's a constant battle, feeling so much disconnect from one's heritage and facing that guilt head on. But again, it's not our fault. Our culture, our heritage, traditions, and spiritual practices have been stolen from us. So to attest to that, this is a piece I made earlier this year, which is titled, "We Are Immortal," which speaks to how resilient our people are, even faced with cultural genocide. We made it through, and we are strong, and we survived. So in this slide, I have pictured here Nati, which means woman in Caddo. So a lot of other young Native youth feel the same as I do, but now is the time to share our stories, but not just Native American stories. The people considered to be others need to share their stories and histories, and this is what this panel is about. It's about the minority to share their stories. So with this piece, I express what it feels like to be a young Native American woman desperately trying to understand a culture and history that's been hindered through years of domination, suffering, and genocide. The raven in some American Indian stories is black because he brought the light to his people, and because this, his feathers are burned black. This is also referencing the black clay that my ancestors used. So written across her torso is Nati, which means woman. I choose to use the colors black, white, and red because they are simplistic yet powerful and part of our sacred colors. So, and her top illustrates the shawls that we wear when we dance, which have fringe that hangs from them. This piece is a representation of myself and a voice for others who share my same story, a story of understanding self, culture, and defining what that means in today's society. So, what can we do? What can we do to support people of color? How can we support artists who are minorities? And how can we support artists who struggle financially but have important stories to tell? So let's get more minorities in galleries. On the right, here's a depiction of American Indians in a natural history museum, which is deemed as a bit dated, but I think it is still educational to have these arrangements in our museums. These museums show information that we natives might not even know. However, I think juxtaposed to this, we need to have more contemporary voices in our galleries to show we are a contemporary people. We are not a forgotten or an extinct species, only in museums. We are still thriving and creating art. I think there's room in the field for yesterday and today. So I have personally received amazing grants and scholarships, and I can say that it has made a huge difference for me. And because of these minority scholarships, I was able to attend conferences and workshops that I would normally not be able to afford. I've been so appreciative of these programs to host me and allow me the opportunity to grow as an artist and an individual. On the left, I was given a fellowship to attend the American Craft Conference, which was located at June Kaneko's facilities. And on the right, I just received a scholarship to go to a fully funded workshop at the Haystack School. So let's get more funding and scholarships for people of color, women, and the queer community. Let's not have art only be for the wealthy. I feel like there should be an effort among all art communities for people to expand their narratives. So encouraging these groups to tell these stories. Let's get more of our history in the classrooms through articles, texts, or critical discussion. Let's put together organizations that help the other succeed, whether that's through art clubs, ceramic organizations, or cultural organizations. In college, I was president of the Native American Student Association, and it was very helpful hearing other people's stories and what they were doing with their degrees. Elise Clote, the woman pictured to the left of me, was an agriculture major, but actually started taking ceramic classes and talking about her Osage heritage. She had her own stories and histories she needed to share, and the work she made was powerful and beautiful. Art can help us communicate and connect in ways that we never thought possible. It just goes to show how strong and necessary art is to people and how we relate to one another. It was encouraging being around like-minded individuals working through the same problems as I was. So I see art as a physical piece of time that acts as a context for humans in their past. For me, it is necessary to continue this tradition of making and telling and sharing. This is a piece I recently created called First Encounter. 1591 was the first time my Caddo ancestors encountered Europeans in what is now Arkansas. We are a thriving people, and myself and my work is a testament to that. I want to share a piece of my history. With my work, I hope to create awareness and address issues that affect people who share a similar story. Through my installations, I hope to tell a story of both how one understands self and culture, but also what defines these ideas in America today. So let's rewrite history. Thank you.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Tabutni. I wanted to ask if anyone knows how many reservations are in Pennsylvania. 0. Do you know the history of when the last reservation was on Pennsylvania? Yeah. So in the 1960s Dam Act, in order to discourage flooding in Pittsburgh with the Allegheny River, they built a dam, the Kinzui Dam, which covered over the last Seneca Territory corn planters band in that area up by Warren County. So it's really important to know where you are, who you're with, who your community is, and to be able to pass the mic, okay? So I'm really excited and honored to introduce another beautiful human being, Habiba Elsayed. And Habiba is from Toronto-based, and Toronto-based ceramic artist Habiba Elsayed received her BFA in ceramics from the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design and holds a diploma in ceramics from the Sheridan College. She is currently a resident artist at Harbour Centre in Toronto, Ontario, and has her own work across Canada. Welcome, Habiba. Thank you.
All right. So, word of warning, I'm super nervous, but I'm going to try to get through this. Thank you for bearing with me. So my name is Habiba Elsayed. I'm a ceramic artist living and working in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. I'm currently a resident artist at Harbourfront Centre and a recent graduate of the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design in Canada as well. So the first image that I have here is actually taken at the Nova Scotia College of Art and Design for my grad show. And the reason why I'm showing an image that's already a couple of years old is that this was a turning point in my practice. Up until this point, I was making sculptural work that was fired and glazed, but I felt that it was missing something. It wasn't actually reflecting the actual exhaustion and brokenness I was feeling and my community was experiencing. And so I decided to actually insert myself into my work, and my work has become more performative and more durational over time. And so this piece is called Weight of Apology. I did this piece over 8 days, 1 hour every day. And in the background, I had audio of various newscasts after terrorist attacks. And between those newscasts, I had moments of silence. So during the newscasts, I would be frantically building up this structure, not allowing it to set up and allowing it to crack and slump over on itself. And during the moments of silence, I would be repairing that wall, trying to fix any of those cracks until another newscast would come on and I would have to continue building on that structure. And so the cycle continues, the rebuilding and the breakage. So clearly, I'm a visible minority, a person of color, I'm a Muslim woman, and most of my work is about those identities of being a Muslim woman living in North America in a post-9/11 society. Most people remember where they were on 9/11. I also remember where I was. I was 11 years old. I was going to an Islamic school, which was actually in a mosque, and many people were picking up their kids early from school that day. My parents didn't pick me up early. I guess they didn't realize how serious that event would be for us. And me being a child, of course, had no idea the repercussions that were gonna follow. So unfortunately, things didn't really get much better. More and more terrorist attacks were done in the name of Islam, and Islam was put on a world stage, and Muslims were expected to apologize and denounce terrorism. And so these day-to-day microaggressions that I was experiencing as a young person, as a teenager, and then into my adult life, of having to say, you know, I don't agree with terrorism, or people asking me, what do you feel about Osama bin Laden? And obviously my answer would be like, not good. So it wasn't good, obviously. That just became so exhausting, emotionally draining, and to a point that I felt that my community wasn't able to progress. All the good from the past. Islam has a really rich history of art, sciences, math. All of those things have been overlooked and been totally shadowed by these negative events. And so I really wanted to make a piece to show how that weight of apology, that weight of guilt, that collective guilt can be very damaging and traumatic to a culture. I'm trying to do the thing. There we go. So this image is from the Stain series. A couple of these pieces are on show at the Invisible exhibition at the Braddock Carnegie Library. And these pieces are tiles that are carved in with Islamic pattern. They're bisked, and then a layer of ink is applied, and then I will sand them away. So when I sand the ink, it removes the stain, but it also damages the pattern below. And this duality, I think, comes up a lot in my work of this simultaneous trying to fix, but also ending up destroying. This fixation on having to redeem our reputations is very damaging over time. At this point, I was also thinking about labor, and that's something that comes up a lot in my work, emotional and physical labor, and actually quantifying that labor. So I would sand this for a specific amount of time, usually corresponding to an event or a newscast. I was also thinking about identity and how my identity is so connected to the political. I can't separate the two. And sometimes I wonder, like, what would my work look like if I wasn't a Muslim woman or if I wasn't a person of color? You know, would it be more experimental or more interesting or whatever? I don't know. We make what we know and what our experience is. The truth of the matter is my identity is political. My very existence is political. Like, people who look like me are banned from certain countries. People who look like me, their clothing choices are banned in certain countries. Even in Canada, they were trying to ban the face veil, and I think they probably succeeded in doing that. So it's not something that I can separate. And I think a lot of times people think identity-based work, artwork, and ceramics is sort of passé, but we have to remember that the identity work that we've seen up until this point has been mainly from white cisgendered males. And those narratives of marginalized people and people of color, we still haven't really heard their stories yet, and we need to give space to them. So the next image I have is from a performance piece that I did last year in October for the Nocturne Art Festival in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And in this festival, I was pushing 850 pounds of red earthenware clay through these really large wrought iron gates. And so this was the first thing people would see when they come into the festival. They would come in and be greeted with this not so attractive artwork. It's pretty grotesque looking, and honestly, it was not about a very pretty topic. So they would be on the other side of it and seeing the clay being pushed through almost like a giant meat grinder or extruder, and it would just end up on the ground on the other side. So these gates actually have a plaque on them that commemorate a particularly bloody battle that happened in Canada to suppress rebels, in quotations, meaning Indigenous people who were fighting for their land. So people often think Canada is this really progressive place, that we don't struggle with racism and colonialism, but unfortunately that's something that we're still dealing with. And it's usually the Indigenous communities and marginalized communities that suffer from those oppressive structures. And so I really wanted to make a piece about that. So this piece was entitled Pushback, and so it was about literally pushing back against oppression. So the final image I have is a detail shot from that performance piece. And in it, you see two people who are obviously not me. So I had an audience component where they would help me push that clay through. And I wanted to talk a little bit about allyship and education. So I've been kind of struggling with this concept of education for a while, about whose responsibility it is to educate. Oftentimes that responsibility is put on marginalized communities and people of color to educate about our own oppression. And I think it's really important to shift that responsibility to white people and people with privilege to actually help us make a change in our society. That being said, I decided that I was going to use this piece for an opportunity to educate anyway, and that I would have conversations with people as they would help me with that physical labor of pushing the clay through. So I learned a ton doing this piece. There was people who did not want to engage. There were people who just wanted to play with the clay. There were people who did those exact microaggressions that I was talking about in the piece. And then there was a very large group of people who did want to engage and who wanted to talk about allyship and wanted to help and were really empathetic about what I was going through at the time. And that was a super heartening experience for me, and it made me feel like that emotional labor that it took to put into that piece and into so many other pieces and into my everyday existence was actually worthwhile. So that was really awesome. So that's my final image. I really look forward to talking more about allyship and labor in this panel, and I thank you all so much for coming out, and I look forward to your questions at the end.
So, I just want to say that clay is pretty amazing. And as an Indigenous person myself in this field, I often get asked the question, do you dig your own clay? As if there's some sort of, hierarchy as to whether it's coming from a shop or you're going out and harvesting it yourself. And I wonder how many of you have been asked that question, or if it's only asked to me because I'm an Indigenous woman. All clay comes from the earth. It's a part of who we are as human beings. Our ancestors, in essence, are in that material. So be really mindful of how we're connected and how we translate it in terms of our otherness. We are human beings, and I'd like to introduce the next most fascinating human being, Mack McCusker. And Mack McCusker received an MFA in ceramics from Georgia State University and is taught at the college level at several universities in Georgia. Mack is currently a resident artist at Odyssey Clayworks in Asheville, North Carolina. Mack's work has been exhibited across the United States. Please all welcome Mack McCusker.
Mic adjust. Can everybody see me over this big tall box? All right. So this was the sculpture that started it all. I didn't know how much it would change the course of my work and my life when I made this in 2016. The bathroom bills that swept the nation in 2016 promoted discrimination. It catapulted transgender people into the spotlight and forced their private lives into a very public dialogue. This piece, a satirical piece about the absurdity of House Bill 2, places me in the center of the bathroom debate. It makes fun of assumptions that many people make about transgender bodies and about the obsession with genitalia. I use humor in my work to make these issues more palatable. Just a little context for House Bill 2. House Bill 2, or HB 2, was first passed in response to the Charlotte, North Carolina ordinance that allowed people to use the bathroom matching their gender identity. Hundreds of cities and counties across the nation have local ordinances to the same effect. But HB 2 stopped Charlotte's, and it stopped any other North Carolina city or county from creating a similar rule. And House Bill 2 would have kept that ban in place indefinitely. The new House Bill 142 did repeal the actual bathroom law, but it did not replace it with any protections for LGBT people. With no laws addressing sexual orientation or gender identity discrimination, businesses, hotels, restaurants, and the famous cake shops can legally discriminate. Under the bill, no laws may be enacted to protect LGBT people in North Carolina until the year 2020. What is it about bathrooms that incites so much hysteria? If you can't use a public bathroom, how are you able to go to work, school, grocery shopping, do things that most people take for granted? When traveling, some don't even drink water to avoid these obstacles. This leads to dehydration and urinary tract infections. I attended a conference in Philadelphia last year where every bathroom in the convention center was made into a gender-neutral bathroom. People of all genders shared the same facilities, and guess what happened? Nothing. It was never a plan of mine to make work about my life, but I was angry and I reacted. I started making work about my own life experiences navigating this journey. I made a choice to become visible and to address the inequalities, prejudices, and fear of differences that people do not understand. This next piece is called What's in a Name? I legally changed my name on Valentine's Day in 2017. This piece was about that process. Our former names come back to haunt us and are often used as weapons against us. It's about the anxiety caused every time we are asked to see our ID. It's also about dead naming. Dead naming occurs when someone, intentionally or not, refers to someone who is transgender by the name they used before they transitioned. I am frequently asked if Mack is my real name, which insinuates that my identity is somehow untruthful or false. I've been going by the name Mack for over 9 years now, and it's invalidating and disrespectful to call me by any other name. I do understand that people who have known me for a long time may slip up, and that's fine. I have no issue with this as long as you try. But not putting forth any effort is entirely different, and it's just cruel. Calling me by the wrong name in front of others who don't know that I'm trans can put me in danger, and it definitely outs me to those who don't know. It puts me at risk for discrimination and ridicule. Names and pronouns matter. So this is the piece that's at the Invisible exhibition. It's called Transition Pending, and it's about the space between masculine and feminine. It is a wide and wonderful place, and it is where I am most comfortable. It's also called non-binary, genderqueer, gender fluid, queer, trans. These are all similar terms. But this can be an exhausting place to be when you're in the public eye. To be constantly asked if you are male or female, to be forced into boxes in which you will never fit. In the world, as my authentic self, I am an other. I can't be put into a category, and that seems to drive people crazy. It's a battle that is really exhausting to fight every single day. When I moved to the small town of Bakersville, North Carolina, I decided that I would need to pass as male if I were going to be safe. I was already on testosterone, so I just stopped shaving. I grew this, and I'm called sir now. I do pass as male, but now my transness is made invisible. So I ask people to use they, them pronouns so that it honors this authentic self. It honors my transness. I do this to be visible because so many of us cannot. We fear losing our jobs, our friends, our family, our children, and our lives. Until we live in a world where we are all free to be, it remains important for those of us who are able to be seen. The binary system in place is problematic in so many ways when you're transgender. Job applications, driver's license, health care, insurance, legal documents all require gender categorization. Airports. The new advanced imaging scanners are actually labeled, I kid you not, with a pink and a blue button. When you approach the scanner, the person operating the machines looks at you, kind of makes a judgment based on your appearance, and then presses one of those buttons. If you're trans and your body parts do not match your outward presentation, this triggers an alarm. This has happened to me every single time I have flown. The alarm is followed by a more invasive pat-down, possible requests for private searches in another location, and then you're subjected to the explosive residue test on your hands. All of this, which is time-consuming and stressful to say the very least. And the TSA's solution to this predicament is for us to step forward quietly and before they scan and out ourselves. So tell them we're trans. To be clear, they're saying that we should do this to a police officer. If you go to the TSA website, there is actually a page on it that says, "Attention transgender travelers." You should check it out. In this system, I do not exist. My body actually triggers an alarm announcing to all that my body is wrong. You can follow these and other instances by using the hashtag #TravelingWhileTrans and witness the experiences of what our daily lives entail. So last year when I spoke about these issues, I could only speculate about what might happen to me as a trans person. Today I can tell you that I have been yelled at in bathrooms, that I have been threatened, I've been called names, and I have lost people in my life that I assumed would always be there, all because of gender presentation, because of identity. But here is where I am today. I am able to be true to myself. I do not have to hide who I am. Being trans and talking with teenagers and others like myself has taught me compassion, strength, and tenacity. I have such an amazing community of friends and loved ones, and sometimes we have to make our own families. Because of my visibility, I have teenagers from around the country emailing me and messaging me with thoughts of hope. And today I like myself. Which leads me to the selfie. We as trans people constantly I get comments all the time about how many selfies I'm gonna put on Instagram. So Lucas Silvera, who is the transgender lead singer of the band The Clicks, wrote about the selfie. The selfie, often viewed as self-indulgent, self-absorbed, narcissistic. I've seen many folks who take issue with other photos of themselves celebrating their own beauty. And I used to think the same thing before I fell in love with myself. I see it now very differently, especially among marginalized folks, especially those who have historically gotten no or next to no representation in the media and pop culture. From folks of color to disabled folks to folks with bodies considered different, I find the selfie actually quite a radical art in these cases. It is us saying, I take accountability for celebrating my beauty. I also love it because as a single trans-bodied person who went through part of my transition in states of singlehood and without much family around me, it was the only way I could keep a record of my life and my personal history. So I have to ask you to ask yourself, why do you take issue? Why are you annoyed with how someone loves themselves? Why do you feel that self-love equals self-indulgent? Perhaps it is this mentality that creates the propaganda to integrate inside you, which is that to love oneself is actually a negative thing, because self-love leads to less desire to purchase things and to make us feel valuable, thus making self-love the most radical tool for revolution you could ever have. So next time you see someone post a selfie, love them for it, because odds are, if you hate them for it, then that's about you, not them. It's okay to look at yourself and say, I love you. I'm often asked what I think people can do as allies to assist us. Sarah McBride, who is a transgender public figure, said in a recent interview, The first thing we need you to do is listen. Come to us with a willingness to grow and evolve. You're going to make mistakes, and that's fine, but be willing to listen and grow from those mistakes. March 31st is National Transgender Day of Visibility, and on that day, I hope you'll remember what you heard today, and that we are real people with real experiences, and we want the same things as you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. We're now going to open it up to questions for the panelists. So I'm going to sit down and we'll have a little chat. Everybody awake? Okay. So we began by asking the question, who gets to tell our stories? Would any of you like to add or respond to that question?
I can only speak like personally, and I feel like is it doing the feedback thing? Okay. I think for Muslim women particularly, our stories have often been hijacked by other people. Muslims are not a monolith, and I feel like this is the same for so many marginalized groups. They're not a monolith. We believe in all kinds of different things and follow in different ways, dress in different ways. And yet our story has been hijacked by not only media, but by other Muslims to say that this is what we are, this is what we believe. And I think it's so important for people to be able to take over their own narrative and show that experience authentically. And get it straight from the source instead of from other people who want to speak for us.
Hello? Okay. Oh. Don't touch that. So I think it's really important for us to share our stories and to individually share your own story, our own experiences. Speaking specifically, I'm American Indian, and we've seen what that story looks like when someone else writes it. A lot of our history and our culture has been eradicated from someone else telling that story. So I think it's really important that we need to stand up and say what we need to say now and make art and ceramics more enriched and more powerful.
Okay, well, I'll jump in too. The main reason I started telling my story is because I am not Caitlyn Jenner, and she has become the spokesperson for the trans community, and most of us don't transition from one binary box to the other box. Most of us kind of lie somewhere in between. And I also get asked why I only do self-portraits, and that's because I can only tell my own story. I can't tell Caitlyn Jenner's story or Laverne Cox's story. I can acknowledge their existence, but there are so many different ways to be trans, and I feel like the youth of today are really kind of evolving that definition of what transgender means, and it means so much more than checking off a box.
So the way that I was raised was that if you're going to learn about a people, you need to learn from the people themselves. And I really hold strong to that in my personal practice. I travel everywhere to connect with community, and I would never think to speak for somebody else's experience. So I'd also ask that NCCA consider some of the presentations in the future when people have opportunities to receive Fulbrights and travel to an Indigenous community and work with them, that it might also be nice to separate a budget aside to include the actual people that they also met from that community and the first person narrative rather than the secondary source. Is art a white male dominated space?
Y'all know I'm gonna say something, right? Well, duh. Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. The first NCCA I went to, Theaster Gates, was the keynote. And that was such an incredibly moving experience for me to have him point out how many people of color are in the audience? He asked, and how many black people? And he's going through the list, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, oh my God, someone said it. It's a problem, not only in ceramics, but in the art world in general, in so many sectors of life in general, that it is a white male, cis male dominated thing, and that I think it's so important to recognize that without defensiveness. I think I talk about this a lot on social media. I'm pretty vocal. If any of you guys follow me, you might know that already. I'm pretty vocal about these things, and people often meet me with defensiveness right away. And I think that that's really unfortunate, because if you think about art school, which a lot of us have probably attended, when we go through critique, if we met every critique we got with defensiveness, we would not progress in our work. Our work would stay stagnant. And so important to, instead of meet it with defensiveness, think about it for a second. Think about these people who've actually gone through these experiences and hear what they have to say about it.
So I think it is a white male-dominated space, but I also believe that we're doing a lot to change that. I mean, this panel speaks for itself. Obviously, we see that there's an issue, and we want to have more inclusivity in the field of ceramics. I can tell you from experience that a lot of, when I was president of the Native American Student Association, a lot of these students and children who are coming in come from underrepresented, a lot of impoverished communities, and then when they get to these universities and get an education or happen to even get a scholarship to go to school, they want to pursue a degree in nursing or engineering, something that is going to guarantee an income after they leave. And I think this is something that we need to try to have more scholarships and funding for people of color or queer people, just to say their stories. I feel like, you know, we see slideshows on Mesoamerica or American Indian artists a lot in the arts, when we have these students walking around on our campuses today who aren't getting to tell their stories through the arts. And so I believe it's something that we're working on, and just even a panel like this, that where we can come together and have these discussions is really important.
Okay, I have to say something, because I get accused a lot of being like losing my queer identity and becoming a male, a passing male. And while I may be seen as a passing male, I am a visible transgender person in the world on my my social media, everything that I do, I am visible in that. And my driver's license still says female for that reason, because I have 40 years of living as a female, and I will never ever be a cis white male. And I kind of feel obligated being that to be sort of representative of that. And I can tell you, as a passing white male, it has not gotten any better. In academia, I think just because I'm still transgender Mac, you know, for better or worse, it is what it is.
So why is identity important?
I'd say, how is it not important? You know, everything we do with sharing our histories, you know, sharing your personal history is important to our field and important to ceramics. You know, and we all define identity in different ways. I feel like identity, that word, is always tied to ethnicity, but we're here, you know, only you can define who you are. No one else can define that for you. So we're here telling you that, you know, we define identity through ethnicity and religion and gender. So I think it's important to start sharing our stories and get a more well-rounded, enriched community, whereas before, we've only heard one side of this story. And so we're up here making work that's important and just sharing our own experiences.
I second that.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just add that I think it's really important, as I mentioned, sometimes, like, I think identity-based work is sort of like people don't really take it too seriously anymore. Like they want to see, the cool new glazes that you're doing, or like something, like a little more trendy, a little bit more on trend. But I think it's really important because it helps other people who are from marginalized communities see that instead of feeling alienated when they go into an art gallery, they feel a sense of connection. So I feel like identity is something that's super personal, but it's also something that connects us to our communities, smaller communities, but also the broader community at large. So I think that it's really important to give space to all these various identities.
So it's important to break bread with people, not in a biblical sense, but just eat with somebody. Have a conversation, learn about who they are, listen. And I think that I hope that people are listening to what's being shared today with the Art of Otherness. I say this because I find personally that sometimes people feel that these stories do not relate to them. So why do they need to attend this lecture? Or I'm not going to go to the Native American show because, that doesn't really apply to me. So there's a little bit of a conversation that needs to be had in terms of sexualizing us as separate entities and not realizing that our relationships are actually conducive to one another and supporting. And so I say that as someone who had to learn someone else's history. I was forced in public school systems to learn everyone else's European art history. So in the same regard, you should respectfully do the same for other people around you. So build your curriculum, include that first person voice, and I hope that you're getting a lot of that today. And the next question is about responsibility. Where does responsibility lie in this conversation? With whom? Why?
So I think the responsibility is going to lie with us, with sharing these stories. I think we're the ones that need to have our histories heard, that have something to say. Again, that's personal, all our histories and identity, that's personal to each and every one of us. I think it's also the responsibility, we need to all be inclusive together. So learning other people's histories, learning other people's stories. I think this is going to help diversify ceramics and help within art itself.
I agree that, to an extent, that responsibility does lie with us giving our stories, but I do think that, hugely that responsibility should lie with allies and with people who aren't marginalized, who have that power in institutions to actually make change. Like, let's be real, it's about who you know a lot of the time. And if you're a person who's in that position that you can make scholarships happen, that you can help with funding for marginalized people, you can create a new group for us or whatever, take that initiative to do it. And also, when you see something happening that is problematic, and I know it's awkward to usually step in, but it's really great to have an ally who's not necessarily from your community still be willing to help back you up. So I think that responsibility needs to be shifted a little bit and distributed a little bit more evenly.
I'm just gonna, go ahead. Okay, I'm just gonna say one thing. So I do believe that, just to kind of counter that a little bit, that it does rely within all of us and, having a different person who isn't marginalized. But just coming from an American Indian standpoint, I feel it's so important that, we stand strong and tell these stories because, look at what's happened for hundreds of years through history when we've depended on our government, when we've depended on a president or even the Anglo-Americans to help us out. Where's our histories? Where's those stories? So I think there needs to be enough waiting. Like, I feel that it's now the time to share your story and have that be heard.
Okay, well, I kind of agree with both. It needs to be an inclusive effort. I could talk all day long in queer environments about my story and it would be heard, but it would not go beyond that. I think we have to rely on our allies to assist us because I only have so much power. And it takes a strong person to get up here and tell your story. And I definitely think we need more people to be willing to do that and to make yourself vulnerable and visible. But we cannot do it alone. We have to have allies bear some responsibility to help us get things done.
Okay, so I'm just looking at the time, and we also wanted to honor all of you and asking that we're done with our question section, but do you have any of your personal questions you'd like to ask some of the panelists here? Sorry, the microphones are right in the aisles, I believe, both aisles, or maybe just this one over here, just this one.
I'm from Washington, D.C., and I have I don't know if it's a obtuse question, but a year ago we had the shocking election of a reactionary president. And we have seen, I think, sort of encouragingly, that there has been a resistance and these waves of new political voices, which in many cases are being quite successful. I'm just wondering if in your communities, in your artistic groups, whether you are seeing any additional recognition of the need for personal voices or minority voices being recognized in your larger milieu.
Okay. For me, most of this stuff happened after he who shall not be named was elected. My initial response to that was to create very, very offensive ceramic mugs to which pay my rent now. Yeah, I mean, it's the reason I think that we're all up here is because all of this happened shortly after that, and there's been an uptick in the amount of hate that I personally feel. I mean, not just with the people who voted for him, but within my own family. And it's been a lot worse than it was before. And I definitely feel less safe today than I did 2 years ago. But again, I think it's why we're having these conversations and why we're up here willing to put ourselves up here to do that, to talk about that. There's only so much a ceramic mug can do, but it does. I mean, some.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's, bringing to light a lot of these voices that are, kind of fighting against some of these policies that he's putting out. And it's sharing our stories and having us grow as a community. He signed the document that was going to minimize the Bears Ears, which has a lot of that's American Indian land. That's where a lot of reservations are, and so they're going to start fracking on that. And some of these occasions that he goes to, where making the Pocahontas reference when he's talking to the code talkers that came to Washington D.C. Some of these political actions he's taking is making us stronger and having a voice together that's saying, hey, this isn't right, like this is how we feel. So it's definitely getting more voices heard.
I'll just add that there is a bit of a positive to this somehow, especially like being Canadian. I'm probably not seeing it quite as severely as you guys are, but we do feel the effects of what happens in the States and Canada, of course, and racist sentiment has gotten significantly worse. Anti-Muslim sentiment has been getting worse. But I have seen so many more people stand up now. Like, there's so many more movements of action. There are a lot of shows I'm seeing these days surrounding these topics and marginalized people, which is really awesome. And usually it's young people that have been taking that action first, so that's really amazing. So I think that there might be like a bit of a silver lining to this orange Cheeto.
Yeah, the Cheeto.
So I am Shinnecock from Long Island, New York, and we have rising waters. So the reservation our territory spanned, and we were people of the water, so we sailed all over the world. And so it's interesting to have a question that talks about, have you seen something different happening right now just because Trump is our current president? I have experienced the notion of what it's like to watch your territory have environmental effects, and that has been generations coming, even previous to my lifetime. So I'm always in this, and our community is always in this, and I think naturally we're born as human beings to live as much life as we possibly can, and after, or if he continues, it won't make a difference, because it's still the same stories that we have to fight. So I'm really happy to see all of this camaraderie with President Trump's election. However, I'm hoping everybody sticks around after that term. And I think that's something that I'm concerned about in terms of the kind of social media society that we live in today. It's not enough to just say you're an ally now. I'm not going to look in the past and ask where you were before. You're here now stay. I need your help. So I think that's the other thing to consider, is we're always going to have a president, and as someone who's an Indigenous woman from the East, I would ask that you stick around, because I am. So.
Hi. I feel that there are a lot of students here, and that's a good thing, yay. But I feel that sometimes we confuse the word diversity for inclusion. So just because there are you have a diverse class, be that religious, ethnic, racial, whatnot, that doesn't mean that everyone in that class feels included. And I am currently a teaching assistant, and I look at the way our first days, which are syllabus day, everyone thinks that's the easy day of the class, we're just going to go over the syllabus. I look at the way they're laid out. So usually we have, our objectives, whatnot, and then we have, our discrimination policy. That some people don't even read, or they just glance over it, they don't even discuss it. And I was wondering, I recently started making changes to my syllabus, and started including words, their definitions, whatnot, to try to promote a safe environment for everyone. Did you have any advice on what educators can do to set the tone right from the beginning with their group of students, and how to foster a more, inclusive environment? Like, what would you do, or how would you promote that?
Can I add and maybe put Mack on the spot a little bit? So Mack, could you answer that question first, and potentially give any suggestions, if you have them, about introductions, reading off a roster, birth names, and potentially pronouns? I don't know.
Okay, I've actually seen this done recently in some of the high schools I've visited and the colleges that I've lectured at, is they go around the room and they ask people to introduce themselves, give us your name and preferred pronoun, and everyone does it, and it's sort of mandatory, and it's usually followed by, if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it, but it then at least allows people to kind of assert their identity, and there are many times where they may not feel safe to do that even when prompted, but it at least kind of acknowledges that the teacher acknowledges that, and I understand that there's a lot of roles that you can't legally change the student's name, but to just sort of make a note of it so that you don't continue to make that mistake is important. It was recently pointed out that if you have substitute teachers come in, please make sure that you alert those substitute teachers what people's names are, because anytime you're misgendered, misidentified, whatever, it hurts. I mean, it's physical pain, and you're not only hurting that student, but everyone in that classroom is then, informed of what that student's birth name was, which is just, it's not fun. It's, you know, high school is tough enough to have to go through that too. On top of it, it's just, I can't imagine personally it was hard enough at 40. So I understand that's happening now in a lot of schools.
As an educator myself, I've experienced screwing up, and and I also have to realize daily that I am also a student myself, and so there is room for mistakes, but you have to recognize the mistake, you have to open up the conversation, and you have to acknowledge that you could be inflicting pain on someone that you want to build that community and classroom with. So I would also say that not just on the first day of those introductions, but in critical discourse, when you break into critique, it's been beneficial in my experience to remind everyone of they, their pronouns before heading into feedback received from students who might not have as much practice. Question?
Hi. I was wondering, like during critique, have you ever experienced someone using like doing something discriminatory, and how do you react to that?
Yes. Yes, I have. And sometimes it's not intentional. Sometimes it is. How do you react to that? I can only just think back to personal experience being like in university. When I moved to Nova Scotia for school, it was a really different environment than Toronto, which is a pretty diverse city. And I don't think I was really prepared for critiques there. And I don't think a lot of the other students or even the profs really were able to engage with my work in the way that I kind of needed. You know, I actually love critique. But in those situations, I think because I was sort of alone in those experiences, that they just couldn't really connect. But sometimes it's kind of good to see it too, because then you realize, like, is this work actually connecting with other audiences who may actually need to understand it? Because I realized that a lot of the work I was making was just sort of an echo chamber. The people who were experiencing it, like, yeah, they understood, and that was awesome that they could relate. But the people who kind of I felt needed to know what I was going through and sort of learn from that, I don't know if I fully got through. And so you kind of have to think about how those critiques go and think, like, you know, maybe I need to change my approach a little bit, but not to put the onus on you at all, but I'm just saying sometimes it's worth to think about. But going through those kind of critiques where something discriminatory happens to you, you know, I think in that moment, all you can do is just pause, brush it off in that moment, you know, go home, reflect on it, and try not to take it completely to heart. Unfortunately, the institutions still have such a long way to go. And as I said, we have to share that responsibility of educating them as well.
When I started talking about my heritage and started talking about my work with the public, I get a lot of questions that are not necessarily discriminatory, but to me, they can be somewhat a little hurtful or offensive. Sometimes I get the question of, oh, do you know your heritage? Or, oh, you don't even look Indian. And I don't take this as something that was meant to be rude or meant to be mean. I take this as we don't know how to ask these questions. We don't know how to talk about contemporary American Indian artists. So I just take this panel and what we're doing and try to educate and try to understand even how to phrase those conversations and have those conversations with each other without seeming offensive or whatnot.
I get all the time, you look so much better as a man than you did as a woman. Which, it's like, are you telling me I was an ugly woman? You know, I mean, I'm sure they mean it as a compliment, but it's I don't even know what to say to that. It's just, sometimes people think they're being an ally, and they're really not. So, yeah.
So I had in the past worked for 4 years at the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico, teaching fellow Indigenous and non-Indigenous students And from my own personal experience, I realized that it's really important to know that although academia and a Western philosophy stresses personal narrative, you do not have to share everything. You have the opportunity and the power to share in time what you wish to share. Even if it's asked of you, no one has the right to have you share more than you're willing to share in that moment. Okay, so remember that. And the other thing too is that when I have had, and I've had lots of comments, too many, it would go over the panel time, but I realized that the way that I responded was that, thank you very much for your question, although some of the questions are more statements, but I am here for a critique. I'm not sitting on your therapist couch, and I would like us to go back to critical discourse focused on the work. So you can take it, turn it around, and refocus it. You have that power, okay? So just remember that. No one should ask more of you than what you're willing to give.
At the same time, what the gentleman earlier talked about with the kind of a resistance happening after the last election, I also noticed a pushback from what would typically I would have thought of people on my side about the identity politics. And so I think it's something that you mentioned earlier within, making work in the clay world right now and just in the art world in general, where there seems to be a dual thing happening where organizations are trying to expand their diversity, but at the same time, there seems to be a pushback on identity politics or doing work that focuses on identity. I just want to know what some of your experiences, or if you've had experiences with that, or just the nuances of trying to have your voice heard when you have kind of a push-pull happening.
I'm thinking. Sorry, I know this should be like a really obvious question. I don't know, it's just something that I feel like I noticed, just like the trend of it, that, or maybe it was in critiques and stuff like that, because I graduated pretty recently, and that I found that like work that was more about the aesthetics, or like there's a there's a specific trend of aesthetics I feel at certain times, like with every throughout our history. And usually work like that would get a better response, or they'd be able to engage with that better. And I found that my work really didn't fit that, the aesthetic trend of the time, I guess. And then the stuff that I was talking about, just people couldn't relate where I was. And maybe it's like context is important too, like where you're showing that work. Because there's certain areas, like in Toronto, it was really different. When I came back, there was a lot of other groups that were, but they were usually created by people of color or marginalized groups, their own shows. So I began to realize too, like, where is it really important for me to show work? I was really struggling with that, and I still am, I think, to a point that on one hand, you want to be accepted into, the institution, into academia. You want everyone to think your work is great. But on the other hand, this more grassroots approach where marginalized communities are making their own shows, their own pop-ups and galleries. Some of the work that comes out of those things are amazing, and a lot of them are identity focused, because that's the work that we're making right now. That's our trend within the smaller groups right now. So I mean, that's I think as much as I can add to that.
I think what we're dealing with right now is hard to look at. So I think when you make art about it, it's hard to look at it. You have to kind of sit with it, and it's disturbing, and people don't necessarily want to see that. So I think that's part of some of the reason we get pushback, is because it's not something people want to acknowledge.
I think, just as a reminder, if we have a conversation, don't feel like we're attacking you, okay? There's history, but there's also learning within history. And so the pushback aspect, I would probably add that we're artists. We go through a lot of personal issues You know, we push back ourselves and we question our worth every day. So I think if you're doing this, or your intention is to continue doing this, that you have to be really mindful of, you know, you're always going to have pushback. Okay, pushback from yourself, pushback from your communities, and it can ebb and flow. There's never like a steady course. And you know, I wake up every day and people ask me, oh, hey, how are you doing? And I'm like, I got another day. You know, I'm alive, right? So that's pretty much what we should honor, and then do the best we can in the day that we're afforded. So I wish life would be easier, but I think we have time for. Okay, so I think we're ending, but maybe just one last question, and we can like really quickly throw it in there. Yeah.
So my question's a little odd. Being an openly gay male within the art community, I have been amazingly lucky in the fact that I have had almost zero discrimination and nothing but encouragement from my friends and family and people really close to me. But I see all this stuff going on within the LGBT community and marginalized communities, and I'm trying to figure out how I can talk about that within art and within the greater world when it's not my personal experience. So I don't know.
I think like research is really important. There's so many amazing resources online now, like thank God for Google. Like there's so many amazing articles written, papers written about this that you can just learn from that and just learn to be a good ally. Like that's the best that you can do. And especially if you are like teaching or in a position where you can impart that knowledge to other people or to like other artists that you work with. That's the best you can do. Just learn and just be supportive to the people who need it.
And I think it's important too to just, you know, just share your own personal story, share your own history. And doing that and sharing our experiences that's what's gonna bring us together and grow as a whole. I feel like in me personally with my work, I always try to make it bigger, like how can I do things for American Indians? And I feel like there's this push right now to have like a really good, strong voice. And you know, we're just artists, we're just making work, and what's important is our specific story. No one else can tell your story. And I think with that, we can grow as a community and help each other out.
I would agree. I would just say that the reason I'm able to be up here is because of people like Mark Burns and Kathy King who did this before me. Mm-hmm. And it's on their backs that I'm able to sit up here and talk about the work that I do. So I think it is important to tell your own story, but also to acknowledge the stories that are being told along with yours and the ones who have come before you.
So I'd like to again say, Tabutni, thank you for being here today. And thank you, all of you, Mack, Raven, Habiba. We've been working together. We just met the other day, but we've already broken bread, and it's really been awesome and a true blessing. So thank you. And if you take anything from the Art of Otherness, you just need to pass the mic, okay? And you need to invite people to the table. I know we all go to really great colleges. Hopefully they're really great. And we tend to stay in our own circles, and that's kind of the blessing of NCECA. But as great as it is to be with your friends, you need to realize that there's a lot of amazing resources here that are available for you. But to ignite that, you need to just introduce yourself, okay? So thank you.